Well, good morning, everyone. I'm not sure there's a bigger topic right now than risk, so this will be a timely discussion. To set the stage for the presentation, AFP conducted a survey several months ago. It did not include the coronavirus, which is something we'll talk about for this panel. But here were the areas where treasurers identified risk. And we've got about 10 or 12 risks that we're going to talk about today. At the time, the risk that was identified as one that was the most challenging is cyber risk, which is something we're going to talk about today. And what's interesting is we've been conducting this survey for many years, and back in 2009, 12% of treasurers said cyber risk was their biggest concern. Now it's almost 53%. And I think it's probably, as we'll discuss today, a risk that is not going to go away. Then strategic and financial and political risk, and David Gergen talked about economic risk, and I think that's probably, or geoeconomic risk, that's probably part of the political risk landscape, is something we'll also talk about. But the strategic, financial, and political were really the greatest risk for impact on earnings. And I suspect also the latest news on the coronavirus is going to have some impact on how organizations think about that. And then we asked, so looking out 3 years from now, what are going to be the biggest risks? No surprise, cybersecurity is still there. But these were the risks that treasurers felt were going to be something that they were going to continue to contend with. Most interesting, though, and it came up yesterday as people were responding to what areas that you were looking for Kariba for, and it's that forecasting. And as part of the survey, it was pretty much acknowledged, and we'll talk about that today, that forecasting risk is getting more and more difficult. So probably no surprise given the environment. And then the other question, and we'll talk about again with the panel here, is how do organizations and treasurers fit into the whole risk landscape in their organizations? Interestingly, 38% do it from a dedicated function, 29% in a functional area, 23% is when the risk arises. I really don't quite understand that sometimes. And 9% aren't doing anything. I'm glad, hopefully none of you are working for those organizations right about now. Then when we have a little, hopefully at the end we'll have some time, but there's been some new developments in terms of how organizations need to think about risk. And COSO, the Treadway Commission, which typically focuses on the internal audit functions and of the organizations, but they came out and said risk needs to be part of the strategic planning process. It needs to be thought of differently than it has traditionally. And then just last week, a new book came out several months ago, Agility. It was by Leo Tillman and General Charles Jacoby. He was a 4-star in the Army, and I did a podcast with them. Now, I will say, when I do podcasts, I had to read the whole book. It was a little thick getting through that book. There were a lot of, it was a little bit difficult to get through, but what came through is, and consistent with the Treadway Commission, was that they believe that agile organizations going forward really need to embed risk into the strategic planning, strategic decision-making process, maybe a little bit differently than companies have traditionally looked at risk. And then General Jacoby uses a lot of examples from the military, who certainly have plenty of risks, in terms of what leadership, or what that means for leadership and organizations in order to embed risk and risk intelligence into their organizations. So that's just a quick overview with the risk landscape, how we're going to approach this. I do think now most people probably know all about Coca-Cola, but I think it might be, if we just quickly go down the panel, reintroduce yourself and a little bit about your organization and role.
Okay. I'm Michael Murray. I work for the Coca-Cola Company. I am the Director of Treasury Initiatives. So right now my focus is on working capital initiatives for the company. I think how we manage risk, we really think about it at Coca-Cola between a business risk and a financial risk. And Treasury has always been focused on the financial risk. The business units focus on the business unit or the business risk. I think over time, though, in the last couple of years, we're all starting to mesh together because they're all overlapping. One drives the other. And so the financial risk is centralized in Atlanta, where the business risk is managed overseas. But we are all now kind of part of the same discussion.
Okay. Sukhvinder?
Morning, Sukhvinder Singh. I'm the Senior Vice President of Technology at a company called Host Hotels and Resorts. It's a Fortune 500 company, and it's a lodging REIT, real estate investment trust. So we are the real estate owners of hotels. My role, obviously we'll talk about this panel in detail, is technology and how technology enables our information security, our capabilities, and how we drive better decision making through agility and information.
And I'm Katherine Powers. I'm with World Vision International, so I'm the global treasurer. And I think some of you may remember from last year, I shared a little bit more detail about World Vision. It's a Christian charity, global, that has revenues just a little under $3 billion, just to give you a little bit idea of scale. And we're in 100 countries. So you can imagine we're looking at risk both the same from a corporate, but also how we head into helping the risk for other people. So unique opportunities there.
Hi, and I'm Jennifer Barretta from Activision Blizzard. So as most of you probably know, we develop and distribute video games. We have our risk is managed based on our three different business segments: Blizzard, Activision, and King, because they all have very unique needs. And then that will roll up into the corporate space as well.
So Michael kind of started this discussion, but I think because we have very different companies here, very different organizations, starting with Sukhvinder, tell us about how Treasury's role or your role in IT, how you really think about risk.
So let me talk about cybersecurity. And just to give you an example, the panel worked hard and we did some research before we came up on the stage. So I don't know how many of you read the Wall Street Journal. This was an article on Monday. It says, losing $450,000 in 3 days, hackers trick victims into big wire transfers. So you think about this is as of Monday. We talked about enterprise risk and managing and all that stuff. So this was the headlines from Wall Street Journal. So overall, in context of cyber, I'll speak to cyber. Cybersecurity should not be on an island. It should be part of an integrated risk management profile for an organization. And that's what we do. We call it ERM. I think that's a standard thing. So it's part of the enterprise risk management profile as to understanding what the risk is, managing the risk, and then addressing the risk as if that occurs. So my biggest, output to you guys would be cyber should not be a standalone, hey, IT, go do it. It should be part of the integrated platform because it impacts business productivity, it can impact operations. And the other outcome is you can't thwart attacks, or you can thwart attacks, but you can't say, okay, I'm cyber risk free, is how do you build resiliency into platforms that the business uses to make sure that there is a plan B, if you will, around availability and business continuity. So those are our two focus areas, and that's what we've been trying to do in our organization in the past 5 years.
All right, Katherine, so where Treasury fits, and since Sukhvinder started the cybersecurity discussion, which is the area that was identified in the survey, and I suspect all of you probably would concur is probably the biggest issue right now amongst a group of a lot of important issues that an organization has to manage from a risk perspective. But how does Treasury think about risk? How does your organization kind of look at risk? Is it holistically, or is it by business unit? Is it by function? And then and how you think about cyber?
Oh.
A lot of questions there.
A lot of questions.
So Jennifer, you can think about all those answers.
Oh, great.
So World Vision would look at it, the way it's structured, we'd look at it in several different ways. One would be the countries that typically raise the funds. So you would think of World Vision US or Canada, Australia, and those are very large entities. I know the US alone raises close to $1 billion. So they look at it individually there. And then we have all of the offices in the field. So it's a combination of the two, where we have World Vision International that functions like a headquarters almost, sets the standards, et cetera. And then you have a lot of that at the field level or in those other offices where they have more of the detailed work.
How much is your time, do you think, spent on risk?
I'm sorry?
When you think about your role, how much is spent on that risk component?
On that type of risk. any
risk.
I think probably 95% of our time is spent in one form or another, either what we're dealing with or what we may anticipate in the future.
Okay, Jennifer?
Yeah, I would say something similar. We also, from a Treasury perspective, we partner, very deeply with our global information security teams with respect to any implementations or any activities, and also locally with the businesses. And I think one thing that folks forget, it's not only your risk management that you need to be concerned about, you need to be concerned about the risk management of your partners and your vendors as well, from a cybersecurity perspective, because that can impact you, especially when we start talking about phishing and social engineering and things of that nature.
So what does that look like in your organizations? How are you actually doing that to ensure that it's not only your internal functions, but your external partners as well?
Well, we have a pretty rigorous vendor onboarding program that is completely segregated from the folks who are invoicing or paying invoices, et cetera. And so it is quite vigorous that they have to go through, and it goes through, just a number of questions. And if that questionnaire comes back and it's not suitable or hasn't answered all of the answers, all the questions, then there will be basically calls and interviews and really kind of a deep dive to understand what their security profiles are, what are they doing to manage, and what are they, if they do encounter a breach, what are their steps and protocols.
Michael?
I think to go back to what you were talking about IT leading the way, I think what we do a very good job at Coke of training the employee, because IT can't stop it from entering. You can't stop the email from showing up in my email box. It's a phishing email, but we do a lot of videos, a lot of training. The company will send out phishing emails just to see who is paying attention. So it's always top of mind. But we also, in Treasury, it's also about communication. We get emails all the time that will look like it's from one of the higher up execs, and it says, hey, I need you to wire money. And it's about communicating to your employees that our treasurer will say, I will never email you and ask you to wire something. So if you ever see it, it's not me. Right. And so you just have to keep the communication going and the training, and because it's up to the employees. They're the ones that's going to click that link, and you've got to train them.
Agreed. So I'll speak IT lingo then. Employees are that they're the most common dangerous threat in every organization. Right. It's process. You can have the right processes, you can have the right tools, but they're not foolproof. And as one of my cyber person tells me, it's a chess game. It's always a chess game. At times you're behind, sometimes you're ahead. To Michael's point, training is paramount, and it doesn't need to be one and done. It needs to be a continuous improvement cycle, because you never know what kind of email messages you're going to get. And the other important thing that we have done is having an incident response plan and a strategy. And I think the three pillars of that is recover, react, and respond.
Now,
so
who
those
has
three
responsibility for that in your organization? How do you think
so
about that?
it's actually a joint effort. So absolutely. So we have stakeholders from our 4 core groups: accounting, HR, legal, and communications. In fact, we presented that to our board, and the board wanted to be a part of that conversation. Say, what role can we play? Should we play to kind of help you in case an incident were to occur? How should we respond? How do we react? And how do we recover? So those 3 pillars, if you will, form our strategy, because you can't stop them. I mean, you can't. It's how do you have that resiliency
Katherine?
built in?
Yeah, and I think one thing that we've done is we've reached out and formed a Treasurers Roundtable that meets in Washington, D.C., and we have connections. And that really helps with a lot of the other the global development organizations, because then we'll share information. So we have attacks that may be in the U.S., but we're also trying to figure out what's the latest scheme going on in Zambia or Vietnam or somewhere different like that. So knowledge is power by sharing that and trying to get ahead of it, educating people.
So that's a particular challenge for global companies. And how do you kind of deal with that when you're in, I assume Coca-Cola is in virtually every country, continent in the world?
I think it's as they said, it's
a full-time job.
It's a full-time job. It's going to happen.
Right.
Just
Right.
do you have the proper plan in place to limit the impact or reverse it, or just how do you respond to it?
Just one more thing I'd like to add on that. I mean, back to the comment I made about vendors. We have seen that, people can tend to get complacent and they think they know somebody and they're getting an email from somebody that they think they know. And your vendor's emails can be hacked as well. It might look like a legitimate email, so especially when you're dealing with banking information or changing payment information, et cetera, you really do got to go to the old school and pick up the phone and call somebody and don't rely on just those email communications.
So from an ongoing basis, how are you monitoring those outside vendors, those external partners of yours?
It's really through the vendor program that we have. Any changes, they go to a completely separate team that has a complete list of who the business says are the primary contacts, and they do physical calls. They do not rely on email or faxed information.
Okay. Anything else on cyber risk? Any light at the end of the tunnel, Sukhvinder, on cyber risk? Or is this like this is forever for treasurers?
No, I think
For
awareness,
organizations.
right? Awareness is the key thing. And I don't want to just say cyber is about protecting the organization, but at the same time, information, information quality, how do you know information is not changed by a third party? And the other key element we focus on also is insider threat. When you think about, we talked about external vendors, external threats. It's insider threats too. How do you not know what is happening internally around, somebody siphoning off information, somebody stealing information. So those are other components of just understanding the landscape and how we want to protect our organization. So that's very important too.
All right. Did you have something to say, Catherine, there?
No, I was just going to say, I like the saying when people say there's the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's just a bear with a flashlight. And I think that's sometimes how it feels.
Yeah.
It's a long, dark tunnel.
I think with
It's a
all
very
these
long.
risks, it's that, unfortunately. All right, let's change topic a little bit in terms of moving from cyber to geopolitical or geoeconomic, as David Gergen talked about. Political instability, regime change, impact on supply chain. Michael, you want to take that one first?
Yes, it's everywhere for us. Again, Coke is in 200 countries. So Treasury has a huge part to play in geopolitical risk and monitoring it. We kind of view ourselves as the economist for the Coca-Cola company. We are monitoring markets 24/7. We are trying to predict what's happening sometimes
Now,
too.
how actually do you do that?
It's just through data. It's especially when you're operating in a foreign country, you're watching foreign direct investment, you're watching their balance of payments. Second somebody establishes.
Is it automated? Is it on a big screen? Do you have people reading newspapers? How do you
It's
do it?
terminals, it's Bloomberg terminals, it's banking partners, it's.
Did you just endorse someone?
What's that? Yes, I might have. Yes, if he wants my vote, he needs to reduce his price on his terminals.
We're staying away from this topic completely.
It's wherever you can get the information, and we do rely on our banking partners a lot. We are constantly having meetings about what their thoughts are and what they're seeing around the world. And then we also use that information from an enterprise standpoint. We meet with our investor relations team once a quarter. We meet with a CFO, and that's what we talk about, or what are the risks out there, and what do we see as Treasury, and what's going on in the world. Because we would hope that the business is also showing the same thing, and if it's not, then there's a disconnect somewhere.
And how are you making that connection from Treasury and getting it down and ensuring that the business units that you're talking?
It's
Is it a
at
challenge?
Coca-Cola. Well, we have an international treasury services team, and there's a person on that team that's responsible for each region in the world, and so it's daily communication. They are also very up to date on what the markets are doing and what the risks are from a liquidity and financial standpoint. So that conversation is almost daily.
Okay, Catherine, I know you operate in a lot of countries as well. How do you
We do.
even begin to think about it as well?
So we look at it from two different aspects. So one would be our operations of how, if you think about it from a treasury perspective, of how we're moving money and those type of things. And then the other part of it is, this is what we do. So I think that was something that was very surprising to me when I moved from the corporate world to World Vision, is that they actually have a science for disasters. So there's obviously the geopolitical as well as natural disasters and so forth. So when those things happen, we tend to go in. A lot of organizations will come out, but we'll go in. So that's something that we monitor as an organization as a, if you want to say, a department or a sector within the organization that are constantly monitoring that. And then we have from a Treasury where we're looking at, and then it would be very similar, leveraging bank information, and you know, you have an idea of there's elections somewhere, and that might make some political violence and some issues, some civil unrest and so forth.
Right.
And then, you know, we do things to try to mitigate that. How do we, in some of these really hot spots, like Syria or South Sudan, so what do we do to protect our people, and how can we minimize our footprint on the ground while still kind of that balance of getting the resources in, but also being protecting of our people and so forth. So there's a number of things that we work. How do we do shared services? How do we leverage the banks to move money and people on the ground? So there's a number of things that we do to mitigate that.
And Jennifer, Activision?
Very similar. I mean, from our perspective, you know, business continuity planning and kind of understanding, you know, where we might have risks is something we think about all the time. We're a very small team based in the U.S. and the Netherlands, so, you know, with, you know, the systems that we use, we do have that global visibility, you know, everything's centralized from a Treasury point of view, so we've had the visibility, and because of where our teams are located, you know, we are able to, you know, flip back and forth because of the cross-training that we've put in place for business continuity. So from a Treasury perspective, we're somewhat insulated from some of that just because of the way that we're organized.
So when you think about the role that Treasury plays and the critical role that they play in identifying the risk, minimizing the risk, coming up with solutions to mitigate those risks, how does that integrate in your own organizations, to the CFO, to the CEO, to the board? How does the real leadership in addition to Treasury really look at all the risk in an organization?
I would just say I think this is an area that as treasurers we need to do a better job, because there's a lot that goes on in our departments. We're aware of so much more than people realize, that this is something where we need to continue that education process. And I know we talked yesterday about being that voice at the table,
Right.
being in the room. So I think there's a number of things that we're already doing, that it's how do we get to the other departments, as well as how do we raise that up. And that's being present and being, having the facts.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think for us, it's the audit committee at the board level. I mean, that ERM plan gets presented every other year, because obviously risks change, profile changes of the businesses, if you will, or a connected ecosystem. So that's, audit committee plays a very pivotal role for us. And I keep on hearing about information, data, and security, right? That is the point. And if I flip to technology, what we call a single source of truth, if you will, data exists in multiple systems in every organization. Is how do you know that's the latest and greatest data? That is accurate, that is correct. So we took a step back and said holistically, we need to rationalize and modernize our systems to, in fact, create as close to a single source of truth.
And who in your company is responsible for that single version of the truth, or
So
rolls up?
again, it's collaborative. So what we formed in our organization is called a GRC group, Governance, Risk, and Compliance Group. Stakeholders from all key business units, heads, if you will, we came together and said, this is what we need to do for an organization.
And
So
Coca-Cola, Michael?
It's the, it's almost the same. For us, it was, to back it up in time, when I first started at Coke and Treasury, it was, you would get phone calls from the business units. They're like, oh, a consultant, we just met with them. They say X, Y, Z is going to happen, and so we're going to do, this plan. And it's like, hold on, let's see what the Treasury guys think. And I think our new CEO and our new CFO have been very good about having the treasurer constantly at the table. And so that they know when it comes to a global view and who's got the information, they come to Treasury first now. And so being able to kind of stop everybody trying to get information from different sources was really key, and just trying to make sure that Treasury is that source of truth.
Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, it's same for us. I mean, Treasury does have a seat at the table with the board, various committees within the company, but we also do reach out to the business units on a very formal, regular basis, on a quarterly basis, but also, weekly, daily. So we try to stay really connected to what their needs are and what their situation is. And we find the same thing that, if people reach out to them directly or they think they're going to, they come up with a plan that they want to execute on, but it may or may not fit into the larger strategic plan and what we want to do as a company. So we try to play a leadership role and help guiding that conversation to the right parties to get to a more holistic conclusion.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's the communication. It's the constant, it's the quarterly, monthly check-ins with the business units, and just Treasury leading that effort.
Yeah.
So you probably would expect from an AFP perspective, where being the advocate for Treasury and finance, I would wholeheartedly endorse that this is a role that Treasury can play, even a more strategic role in their organizations, making sure you have the right talent and the skills and the ability to actually take that data and make some sense into that data. So, and anyone disagreeing that this is especially given where we are in terms of risk and the risk landscape out there now, where Treasury really could play a much more strategic role.
Yeah. And I think a shout out to Kariba, right? So that platform is helping all the teams, right?
I was hoping someone would say that.
Exactly.
I wasn't going to do it.
I mean, get this source of information together.
So we all get invited back.
Exactly. Well, easy access, secure access, right? So we know that information that you're looking at is fresh, is secure, and nobody else has touched it. So I mean, shout out to them too, right? That platform has helped us do that better and more efficiently. So.
Right.
Yeah, and I think automation is key because as talked about yesterday, it's now we can focus on the strategic stuff. We can lead that discussion. We're not sitting there clicking buttons and moving cash around and doing everything in a manual way. Now, we've got more time to spend to think.
Do your teams have the skills to do it? The data analytics skills?
Skills, yes. I think it's, from a technology perspective, it's all about change management. And I think training is paramount, but constant tone at the top to say this is the right thing to do, aligns with our strategy, that helps. And over time, you need to skill up people too. I mean, digital skills are the most important skills in this century, in the world we are living in, so absolutely. But change management is difficult, it's not easy. There are multiple approaches, you can try it. Different organizations have different cultures and different kinds of people, but that is important because without that, it'll fail, But we were successful, that's why I'm sitting here.
Katherine or Jennifer, you ready to take the mantle, more strategic?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
Absolutely.
All right.
And I think it's a matter of having the time for the team, the capacity. So that really does go down to having your system so things are already taken care of in advance. It's done, and now we can really look at, the horizon, what's out in front.
I hear all the time from our members, and probably you will endorse this, is that a lot of times Treasury is the last kind of part of the organization to get resources, to get money for technology.
I think IT is.
Yeah, you're the guy that gets all the resources. But is this an opportunity for Treasury to stand up and say, look at all the risks that we have to deal with as an organization? Is this an opportunity?
Yeah, I do think it's an opportunity, and I think what's most important about that is the ability to grow and scale, and you need your Treasury Department to be able to do that along with the business. And without technology and automation, it's difficult.
Right.
Right. And so that's the main reason that I would put out there is that your business is not going to be able to grow, and Treasury is not going to be able to support your business the way it needs to without technology.
And I think, I was just going to say, one of the things with Treasury is in some ways, we're kind of quiet in the background. Everything goes well, no one thinks about it. The money
keep
gets
hearing
there.
that. I keep telling you, you got to stop
technology
being
again.
quiet in the background.
I know, but if it goes wrong, everyone knows. So I think this is the opportunity to really share what, the capabilities.
Yes, I would agree. And I hope everyone out there does too. All right, so we're going to get to the topic that seems to be the topic of the day. There's nothing more in the news than the coronavirus at this point. And I know we're probably right at the beginning. I know that I'm personally going back tomorrow, and we're having a meeting about how we're dealing with this both internally in the organization. And for those of you that go to the AFP conference, thank God it's not till October, but still something we have to think about. So. Jennifer, you want to start off? How are you initially thinking about the impact it's going to have on your business, your employees? There's no right answers here. So what do you think?
Are we talking about the virus?
Yes.
Okay. Well, so the well-being of our employees is paramount, number one. So hands down, our guidance to employees is, first of all, take care of yourself. Use your best judgment. If you think you need medical care, get it. Follow, the advice of local authorities. And, the company, corporate, we've got teams in place that are to assist employees if need to reach out if you have a need. That's number one. And I think the other piece that people forget is, while, whether or not you're a company that has a lot of folks that work from home or not, if you're in a situation where you do need to have folks work from home, you got to make sure that your systems have the capacity for that. And have plans in place like, maybe not everybody needs to get online in a situation. What are the critical teams that do need access and what needs to be done, and really having a plan around that.
Yeah, we had talked about that backstage where, a couple of years ago, there was an ice storm in Atlanta, so all of Coca-Cola stayed home to work. Lo and behold, the VPN could not handle everybody logging in at the same time. So we had to log in from Japan and Brussels and use different VPNs throughout the world to handle it. So I think, with coronavirus, it's a great opportunity. I mean, everybody needs to go back and
Let's say it's a challenge.
Yeah, it's
not
a
great
challenge.
opportunity.
You need to relook at everything and
Right.
kind of decide, do you have the right processes in place, and can you sustain working from offsite for a longer period of time?
Do you
Right.
need a new IT leader?
And not all folks can work off-site, depending on what they do. If you're talking about IP development and things like that, you've got other security risks around that where you may not want that ported out of your environment.
Right.
Catherine?
So we would have, similar to what's already been said, I think the only twist with us is that, just like the Ebola crisis, that we would be looking on the ground. So we do operate in China, and from a security, we go through with people, making sure they're safe. But the other thing is, what are we doing to help the people on the ground? So we kind of play, again, both sides of it.
Okay. So when we had our conversation, when we were going to all be panelists, I asked each of them to think about 2 or 3 or really key critical takeaways. So Sukhvinder, you want to start with yours?
Sure.
For the audience?
Absolutely. So my takeaways, I guess, for all of you was understand your individual organization's risk profile. There are different risk types for each organization and what your tolerance is. Second is, what risks are you trying to address, and understand the solution. It's people, process, and technology, not in that order, but in that sequence. Is where do you want to put your focus on? And then obviously, going back to Kariba, how does that fit into your ecosystem? And you think about, integration, data movement from one system to another, privacy. Are you under some privacy regulations? And data privacy and regulations. For example, GDPRS doesn't apply to us, but maybe it applies to your organization or the California Consumer Protection Act. So how do you want to address that, and how do you want to manage that?
All right. Catherine?
Yeah, just 2 quick things. It really comes down to the human element. So you can have great training, great processes, and those are critical, but it comes down to that human element. So I think that would be the one. The second is our interdependencies and understanding within our organization and connected to other organizations, just ensuring we understand those interdependencies. So.
All right. Michael?
I think my biggest takeaway was just not managing risk in a silo. You have to be across the business. You've got to bring everybody to the table, and I think Treasury needs to lead that. And there's a big push. Everybody's centralizing Treasury, but that doesn't mean that you operate in a silo. You centralize, but then you get the message back out and you help the business.
All right. Jennifer?
I would say, carve out the time to document it. I mean, a lot of people, we know what we're going to do. Oh, I know what I'll do with that situation. But, when you're actually in that, it's very helpful to have a plan. It doesn't have to be a binder of 300 pages, but, who's on point? If someone doesn't respond, who's next in line? What are your escalation points? What are your, for us, we're actually setting up, certain individuals, authorities will expand in certain situations if others aren't reached. So knowing kind of what that plan is and who your key business contacts are and who you might need to reach out to as well, and make sure you've got kind of coordination around that.
And my final would be, this is an opportunity for Treasury really to play a strategic role in their organization. Thank you so much. This was a star-studded panel. Thank you, Kariba, for inviting us, and have a great day, everyone.